Welcome to Bamfordrose, and it's question of the week time. This week's question of the week starts in its roots from a familiar background, in that someone's seen something written on a forum somewhere. It has a connection to what they're doing with their car, and they contact me and say, hey, I've read this. Is this true? Does this affect me? Unfortunately, forums being what they are, there's a few uninformed keyboard warriors putting across info that's incorrect or ill thought out, and people who know no better take this info as gospel. This latest offering stems from a discussion about whether the V8 Vantage is okay in terms of its oil system and fuel system for use of the car on the track. The first question is my dry sump oil system on the V8 Vantage okay for a track? I've heard it's not very good, it's not very efficient at getting the oil out of the engine into the tank. And the second question is, well, I track my car a lot. I've read that the fuel system suffers problems with fuel delivery. Is this going to cause me a problem on my track day? First thing to remember is that the V8 and DB9 were developed around Nürburgring, driven by professional drivers, and the cars put through their paces. So if any problems were present, do you think those designers, those development engineers just shrugged that off and let it go into production with a repeatable problem that every car would exhibit? The answer is obviously no. The question raised over the oil system is that there's been some talk on forums about the oil system, the dry sump system, not being that efficient. Fundamentally, that's probably a correct analysis of that dry sump system on the V8 engine. But crucially, the oil system will behave perfectly okay. You know, if you've got a car on slicks and you've got a high G loading and you've got the engine revs up to maximum, so the oil circulation time is pretty quick, it's not stopping in the tank for a long time before it's recirculated back into the engine, then that's pretty much the worst case operating state for the oil system. And in that worst case, the oil system behaves perfectly fine. If the oil going into the engine is about 90 degrees, then there's about a 30-degree uplift in temperature, and even with 120-degree oil outlet temperature, by the time it's been taken out of the sump, run through a cooler, back into the tank, back into the engine, then it's going to have cooled down to approximately 90, and there is no temperature issue or no oil supply starvation issue. But whilst the system is perfectly fit for purpose, it isn't operating as efficiently as it could do. And perhaps it's discussions over the years about that on forums which lead people to add 2 and 2 and get 5 and incorrectly label the oil system as deficient if you're going to use the car on track. On a high performance motorsport engine, for each crank bay, for each crank web journal of the engine, then there will be a scavenge port sucking out oil from the bottom end. So as the oil comes down the drainways from the cylinder head and is dripped back to the sump from the crank, piston and rotating parts, that oil doesn't hang around in the bottom end for very long because it's sucked out by the whirlwind created by the scavenge pump, and there will be many of them in the bays across the crankcase. The Aston V8 doesn't have individual scavenge pumps for each bay. It has a scavenge port at the bottom of the sump. This dry sump pan therefore does have a volume of oil sat on it, meaning that it's not properly a wet sump because an amount of oil is still circulating around the crank, causing windage, causing a parasitic loss and causing a power loss as a result. But whilst the sump is working a little bit inefficiently, whilst there is a little bit of a power loss, on the V8 engine it's 18 to 20 horsepower. Now, I've done some test work where the sump was artificially extended, so the oil volume didn't cause any crank windage, and that was about the maximum gain that could be had. It's just that that dimension that you had to extend the sump was unrealistic to fit in a car, meaning that it was a test bench test only. And principally that's why the V8 does have a dry sump, so that it gets the bonnet line low, which was a styling requirement. The dry sump system was never supposed to be the absolute best motorsport equivalent to give the best power output. But if you're tracking your V8 Vantage, then forget all that and just know that as long as you've got sufficient oil level, then your oil system is okay to run continuously. So now we're on to the fuel system, and the comments about the fuel system really do make me laugh. As we know from a previous video looking at Red Pant's issue with his fuel system, where we looked at the amount of engine revolutions it takes to crank the engine over, and a poor starting issue was being blamed on fuel supply rather than it being his starter motor, which was burnt out by an aftermarket exhaust manifold that was inadequately heat shielded. We know from that video that the fuel system is the most monitored system on the car. Monitored because if it goes wrong, the consequences can be disastrous. So any leaks in the system, or the system not achieving the correct rail pressure and the pump running too much, close to 100% duty cycle, all of these issues are detected and checked for in fault analysis modes. I commonly see the post that we can see here, which this particular poster says, "I've been on track and had the engine bogged down on tight bends when the tank was around quarter full. The instructor was an AM staff member and said it was quite common due to tank design." So perhaps you think that the development engineers, when they had the test cars around Nürburgring for those years before it was put into production, never actually went round a tight bend with a quarter of a tank of fuel and didn't uncover this problem themselves? Because it's either that or you've got it wrong. I think you've got it wrong. In the race world, what they do is get rid of the metal tank that the factory fits on road cars, and they often run with what's called a bag, a fabric tank, which is fitted inside the car. Now, it's fitted inside the car for better weight distribution between front and rear axle compared to where the metal fuel tank of the road car would be sitting. Often, especially for endurance racing, the race fuel tank is bigger. Typically on the V8s you get them up to 100 litres. Now, where the pickup point is in that bag tank, there could be some sloshing around or fuel level surging in the tank, and this is overcome by foam inserts or any other device which is there to prevent level surging. So a race car does fundamentally have a different setup, but it's for different reasons, for race reasons. It doesn't mean that the road car fuel system has a delivery problem. So if we're led to believe what this poster suggests, then there's been a bit of an engine torque delivery hiccup, and that's put down to fuel surging. If the fuel was surging momentarily, there was less fuel delivered to the rail by the pump, and then there was more fuel delivered to the rail by the pump, then many fault codes would trigger and the car would go into limpo. Fuel rail pressure is set on the V8 to 55 psi, and the pump isn't even running at half its capacity to deliver that. So let's just say that a low fuel rail pressure was detected. The pump would immediately up its duty cycle and run closer to its maximum. If that didn't deliver immediate increase in fuel rail pressure, that behaviour would be detected as a fault and the car would go into limpo. That's why if the engine is running, then we're pretty much guaranteed at all times the rail pressure is 55 psi. It's not surging, there's a perfect supply to each injector, and whatever isn't used is spill return fed back to the tank. So it's incorrect to say that this keyboard warrior has found a problem with every single production car ever made at quarter of a tank full when the car is operated around a track. What most likely is happening is that the car is being used around a track, and then several engine management system algorithms, when the car is put through its paces more strenuously on the track compared to the road, causing a drivability hiccup. This could be something like knock control, retarding the spark because a throttle input gave a little bit of detonation. It could be exhaust gas recirculation, putting a little bit spent gas in under the most arduous circumstances when you want the most power out of the engine, and you just notice that as a little bit of a lethargic pickup. Who knows, it could have been something as simple as traction control being on and it was dynamic stability control or traction control causing a little bit of a disruption to the smooth delivery of torque to the road wheels. I would bet that if I remapped the engine management system, turned all of those road car algorithms off, and basically put a race car calibration into that road car, then repeat the same drive at the same quarter of a level fuel tank volume, and the hiccup that is being commented on wouldn't exist. So hiccups in engine torque delivery, any unsmooth, undesirable characteristic that you experience when you exercise the car to its limits around the track, is probably road car drivability algorithms or other emissions related algorithms that now cause a slight niggle on track. Remap all of those off, put a race car cal into the car, and that same problem won't happen. And it's nothing to do with a design flaw causing fuel surge. Hope you like that question of the week, and I'm sure we won't have to wait too much longer for another saga of forum misinformation to make it to the next question of the week. If you haven't already done so, then please subscribe to our channel, click us a like, make a comment on today's question of the week, and we'll see you on the next one.